Farm Basics is brought to you by the Liberty Link trait and Liberty herbicide from Bayer. The most reliable weed management solution, Liberty Link and Liberty herbicide are the link to efficient row crop production and sustainable weed management.
During our Farm Basics time today, we wanted to answer the question, why do farmers like cold temperatures?
Well, there's a lot of farmers that don't, Brian. In fact, we could call Dad down in Arizona right now. He's probably having lunch with a bunch of other farmers down there trying to avoid the cold weather.
Okay, so I just want to clarify this. This is not why they like cold temperatures to live in, because obviously not a lot of people like that. But the reason why farmers like cold temperatures, I mean, it comes down to a bunch of things, but basically, if we can get the ground really cold, that changes a lot of things. It kills a lot of things in that soil, and even compaction, Darren. It will influence compaction to some degree.
When you're talking about compaction, what you're talking about, Brian, is the freeze-thaw activity in the soil. When we get good amount of moisture down into the soil and it freezes, it will swell, just like if you have water that freezes in a water bottle, and a lot of times you'll see that bottle explode or pop the top off it. You have the same kind of activity going on in the soil. So when you get that freeze-thaw activity, if you have a hard compacted layer, if there's some moisture that's in that compaction zone, you could actually break up the compaction a little bit. It's not a huge thing, but a little bit can be helpful.
Yep, what I look at even more though is killing bugs. There are a lot of different methods to killing bugs, but this is the simplest and easiest method that I know. We're just gonna freeze them. And if we can do that, if we can get that frost going way down deep in the ground, we have a lot fewer bug problems the following year, most often. It's not a for sure thing again, but I really like that deep freeze in terms of insect control.
Well, the other thing about cold is it gets rid of a lot of weeds. You think about some of the weeds that are bad in the southern part of the United States. We don't fight those weeds up in the north because we freeze in the winter and we freeze hard. Now, there are certainly some species of trees that can't survive in the north and this kind of thing that, I wish I could have fruit trees in my yard, but outside of apple trees, there aren't very many fruit trees that grow very well here. But there are certainly a lot of weeds that we don't have to fight when we have cold winters.
Same thing with diseases. There are a lot of diseases that farmers in the southern United States have to fight. We don't really have those issues in the northern part of the country. Rust is the big one that I would just briefly mention. We see rust in a whole bunch of different crops. We might see it in corn or soybeans or wheat. There are all different kinds of rust too, and for the most part, those don't survive in the northern U.S. because of our cold temperatures. So the only way we get rust here is this rust has to blow in from the southern United States. So the colder the temperatures get, the better off we are, and the further south those cold temperatures get, the better off we are in terms of preventing disease problems the following year.
Well, for farmers, when the temperatures get warm in the summer and cold in the winter, some people think, that's terrible for them. They've got to fight all these changing conditions. Actually, there are a lot of benefits to the 4 seasons happening. And when we get a cold winter, I hope we never have, but for me personally, but out in my fields, it's kind of a nice thing sometimes to help control diseases, insects, and weeds for farmers.
Hey, one last thing I was going to mention on this freeze-thaw thing. If we can get a deep frost down in the ground, what it also will do is freeze tile lines, and then we will not have water going out our tile lines some years on our farm until mid-May. So when that happens, we have a lot of people who are concerned about, adding tile is going to create flooding. Well, when do we normally have flooding? It happens in the early spring, March, April, that kind of thing. And we just don't see that usually because the frost gets deep enough. So we encourage farmers to put their tile lines in at 3 feet deep. Usually those tile lines will freeze up in the wintertime, and we don't have any water going out at times of the year like really early in the spring when we have issues with flooding.
Well, the other thing about those cold winter months, Brian, is our weed of the week has a tough time growing. Can you identify this week's weed?